It was called the blackest day in sport, the day in February last year when the Australian Crime Commission and the anti-doping regulator announced a sweeping investigation into the use of performance-enhancing supplements. At the time, the Justice Minister, Jason Clare, warned that professional sport is highly vulnerable to infiltration by organised crime and that links with criminals mean players risk getting caught up in match fixing. In the public's mind, former rugby league front rower Ryan Tandy came to personify that danger. He was the first person convicted in Australia of fixing a game, and he was later accused of being the standover man in a drug-related kidnapping. Tandy died recently at the age of 32 of a suspected overdose of prescription drugs. He was buried yesterday on the New South Wales Central Coast, where hundreds of friends and family gathered to remember a once promising athlete whose life spiralled out of control. Dylan Welch reports.
Through the troubles and missteps of a life lived hard, one thing Ryan Tandy never lacked was friends. They gathered yesterday at Palmdale Cemetery on the New South Wales Central Coast. They farewelled a man who had become known to the public as one of rugby league's bad boys, though few at his funeral would agree with that description.
Even when he was going through his tough times and then you sort of give him your tough times, there was always the encouragement that don't worry, things get better, you're always not going to be down.
The real Ryan is somebody that those who knew him cherish and will miss for the rest of their lives.
Tandy died late last month from an apparent drug overdose, believed to be prescription medication.
The former NRL player Ryan Tandy has been convicted of trying to rig a match as part of a betting scam. Former NRL player Ryan Tandy has been charged with holding someone against their will on the Central Coast.
In the years before his death, Tandy's life spiralled into drug addiction, chronic gambling, organised crime associations and match fixing. His case may have been extreme, but Tandy's therapist, sports psychologist Rob Brown, says his struggle is far from unique.
A lot of athletes are trained to push through their limits and not to think of the cost because the rewards are so great. So when they're no longer athletes, when they don't have those supports there, when there is no coach or mentor, when it comes down to themselves and their own decision making, sometimes that's flawed and sometimes that leads them into trouble.
Tandy grew up on the New South Wales Central Coast, in the house built by his tradesman father, David. David died of chronic osteoporosis when Tandy was 14.
And it really, really hurt him. He said that he did go and visit his father in hospital and he did have the chance to say goodbye to his father. And I think from that moment onwards, that's when things started to become real difficult for Ryan Tandy.
But still, mate, I'd be...
Rugby League reporter Josh Massoud met Tandy when he was playing for the Melbourne Storm. They became firm friends. He says Tandy developed a problem with gambling soon after his father's death.
He had that gambling problem from a very young age. From probably 16, 17, it began to fester.
Rugby League was to have been his redemption, says his longtime mentor and coach, Kieran Dempsey.
He wanted to be a footballer. I think he realised at an early age that that's what he wanted to be. He didn't have a trade behind him, so this was his calling.
He first played in the NRL in 2003, but it was in 2009 when he joined Melbourne Storm during their premiership-winning season that his career began to take off. But behind the scenes, his gambling was getting worse.
It's been a pattern for his whole life, even going back as far as when he played with the Dragons back in the early 2000s. He had to go to the extent of getting the CEO to look after his rent, look after his groceries, and then pay him what was ever left just to make sure he had those needs met.
The questions they were asking me...
It was also at the Dragons that Tandy met Hassan Saleh, then a young winger who, like him, was a problem gambler.
You look now at all the sports betting agencies, everyone's got an ex-sports star, ex-footballer, spruiking their business. And they're not bad jobs for those sort of boys, but, it gives us accounts with credit. It gives you a line to get yourself into trouble.
Saleh now owns a bar and restaurant in Sydney's east. When he left the NRL, he ran a King's Cross nightclub known to host footy players and other more dubious characters. An NRL player was shot at after leaving the club in March 2008. Saleh is also close to Tandy's manager, Sam Ayub, and notorious former footy player and confessed match fixer, John Elias.
I know Johnny Elias really well. He coached my team for Lebanon, in our team. But did we ever know him in the underworld, sort of John Elias? No, we don't, because back in the day when he was doing that, he kept that to himself, and he was a rugby league player to the rest of the world.
Ryan.
By 2010, when Tandy moved to the Bulldogs, his gambling was so chronic, he bet on his first match when the Dogs played the Gold Coast Titans. NRL rules prohibit players from gambling on the sport.
Obviously did get to a point at that stage in his life where he was, I think the court heard that he was about 70,000 in the hole there at the Bulldogs.
Tandy was placing bets on racing and NRL games with jockey manager and former journalist John Shell. Shell's betting ledger shows Tandy's roller coaster punting spree over a week in June 2010, the same month he joined the Bulldogs. A string of losses left him owing John Shell more than $30,000. According to John Shell's evidence at Tandy's trial, when Tandy refused to pay, Shell started to chase Tandy's manager, Sam Ayub. Shell texted Ayub warning he'd reveal Tandy's gambling activities to Bulldogs management if Tandy didn't pay up.
He is going to come out headhunting.
By Shell's account, the tensions over Tandy's gambling debt came to a head one night in July 2010. Shell had gone to the Moorebank Hotel to watch a Danny Green title fight. There, he was approached by a man known to him and Tandy, who delivered this warning.
You'd want to drop off chasing Tandy for that money. He's tied up with people that you don't want to know. You don't want these types of blokes turning up at your front door.
Frightened, Shell texted Tandy to say the debt was forgiven.
Sounds good, because I didn't want things to get ugly.
Shell's evidence was that a few weeks later, he decided to alert the Bulldogs. At a cafe in Sydney's Homebush, he met Bulldogs football manager Alan Thompson and the club's CEO, Todd Greenberg. Greenberg is now the NRL's Deputy Chief Executive. Shell said he showed them Tandy's betting ledger, which lists a series of losing bets on racing and rugby league matches. Despite being presented with evidence Tandy was betting on NRL matches, Shell said the pair told him to take the issue up with Tandy's manager. Greenberg and Thompson declined to be interviewed. Via a spokesman, Greenberg denied being told about Tandy's NRL betting plunge.
I don't think you can blame the NRL. The NRL aren't parents. The NRL aren't there to hold footballers by the hand.
Super Saturday continues on Fox Sports.
4 days later, the Bulldogs played the Cowboys in Townsville. The game that would bring Tandy's league career crashing to an end.
A big bump off there, the right hip of Ryan Tandy into Billy Tonga.
Off the field, bets had poured in on a so-called exotic bet that the Cowboys would score first with a penalty goal. In the opening minutes, Ryan Tandy set the scene for the Cowboys to take that penalty and for punters to take home more than $100,000.
It was brought down by Ennis and also Tandy. Ugly looking tackle, and the penalty comes right in front of the posts.
It was a fix, but it failed when the Cowboys scored a try instead.
And they've taken the quick tap. Anthony Watts flings it out the back over the shoulder of Scott Bolton. It's a try to the Cowboys in the opening 90 seconds.
If it was clearly a fix, it would have come off. It didn't even come off. You know, you look back over the years, a fix has to come off for it to be called a fix.
Why do you believe the case is unfair against you?
Hassan Saleh, who was one of the people who bet on the match, says Tandy was confident he would be cleared.
He honestly thought that it was going to go away. He would keep playing footy. And then, 6 months later, police rock up at I lived with him at the time, rocked up at our place, raided our house, took mobile phones, took everything.
In October 2011, Tandy was convicted of dishonestly attempting to obtain a financial advantage for Ayoub, Elias and others. The case against Ayoub hinged on the evidence of another former player, Brad Murray, who was captured on video betting on the game. He gave evidence in Tandy's case that Ayoub had told him the fix was on. But Murray later changed his account and said he'd lied in his original statement. The charges against Ayoub and the others were dropped, and Ayoub was awarded more than $250,000 in legal costs by the police. Tandy was the only person convicted. The NRL also banned him for life.
They said, this bloke's our scapegoat. He's not high profile. He's not anyone's friend in a powerful position. We can just throw the book at this kid as hard as we can, and it's going to scare a lot of people off trying to pull a shifty here or pull a shifty there, which it did. It did scare a lot of people off.
He was pretty much outcast from the game for life before he was even found guilty in front of a court. And I think that when that happens and when someone doesn't have any hope left and their options are shut off, they can spiral out of control.
In mid-January this year, Tandy's life hit an all-time low when he was accused of a drug-related kidnapping. According to a police brief of evidence, it happened near midnight at the Mingara Recreation Club on the Central Coast. A man involved in a dispute over drugs and money was walking to his car. As he got in, another man, later identified as a drug dealer, jumped in as well. Tandy stood close by. They drove around all night, demanding the victim hand over the drugs and cash. Police later claimed Tandy's role was that of standover man. There were rumours an outlaw motorcycle gang was involved. The next morning, Tandy drove the kidnapped man to the Commonwealth Bank at Gosford, where he withdrew $4,500 and handed it over to Tandy, who waited outside. The victim later told police he thought about running, but feared the men.
They were going to smash my legs. I've heard them talking about other bashings, and I know who they've got backing them.
Tandy was arrested later that day.
I found out like everyone else did when it hit the headlines, and I was surprised.
Tandy was due to face court on charges of kidnapping when he was found dead last month. Hundreds of family, friends and associates turned out yesterday for his funeral. They remembered him not as a criminal, but as a talented athlete, loving son and friend.
If you're his friend, you're his friend. He valued his friends, and it was only a few weeks ago we were sitting on the couch at my house and he told me his love for his mum, his family.